What's up, guys? It's Q&A time on August 19th, 2018. Did Q&A on Instagram and Facebook this week. It was, oh man, I don't remember. I think it was open topic this week. Yep, it was. So I will start on Facebook questions here. How do you aid digestion during peak week, specifically slow digestion? Well, I mean, a lot of people run into issues during peak week, like constipation would probably be the main one. And there's a couple reasons for that. It could be stress. It's also important to remember, food volume's probably low. There's just not a lot of waste to really form a good stool and go. So, I mean, there's a number of things that could potentially be an issue, but it seems to be pretty common. If it's during peak week, obviously we want to keep out all the main things. You really shouldn't be having things that are you're intolerant to. And to begin with, you should probably know what those things are by now. You shouldn't really be introducing any new foods, nothing like that. So this might be a case where I'm going for something that's going to give like a mild laxative effect, like Super Dieters tea. A lot of people like to use that. It has senna in it, which is a laxative, or even like milk of magnesia. I don't like the idea of using the laxatives, but you got to make sure that at that point you need to make sure it's moving through. So look at your fiber intake also. Definitely wouldn't suggest dramatically increasing your fiber, but maybe if you're getting no fiber in your diet, people that are on like a protein only, maybe protein veggie diet, and fiber's just ridiculously low, you can look into that. There are a couple different, there's a couple different things you can do there to get it moving through. But if you're real close to a show, honestly, I would just keep something on hand that's gonna get you through if you have to. But anything, there really shouldn't be that much drastic change. Anything in terms of food intolerances and overall digestive issues, they don't just miraculously pop up during peak week. They shouldn't really be any change. You might be drinking more water or doing something along those lines for your peak week, or obviously filling out, carving up, whether it's carbs, fats, or whatever. But there shouldn't be anything inherently different that's going to cause you to all of a sudden have digestive issues. So if you do, look at something that you changed in your plan, or check your stress levels. Just curious, do you personally track trace macros from things like nut butters and whatnot? Yeah, I track everything. That's just what I do personally. I don't, there could be instances where you don't necessarily have to track everything, as long as you're consistent and you're doing the same thing every day, you're basically tracking it anyhow. I do track everything though, because I do change stuff frequently. Not necessarily, I eat a lot of the same foods, but I move things around a little bit. So especially like carb sources and protein sources, those things have extremely different levels of fat in them. For example, even carb sources, oatmeal versus rice versus a rice cake, versus cereal versus potato. That's going to make a huge difference in overall macro intake, especially with as many different protein sources as I use, and some of the more exotic meat stuff that I like to get into, and the organ meats and all that. The fat intake and protein per actual gram of meat itself varies so much that there's no possible way that, I could not track it, but I'd be all over the board calorically. So yeah, I track everything. I have everyone track everything. Just keeps things in line. There's not guessing any variables that way. Even like condiments and stuff, I don't really use Splenda. I use like stevia blends. Doesn't have any calories, but if it was a sweetener that had like maltodextrin or dextrose or something, I would track that. Sometimes I use like the no sugar ketchup, or G. Hughes barbecue sauce or something. I account for those macros also. Just keeps everything in line. Some people have more metabolic flexibility and more flexibility in their intake, and it's not as big of a deal. In some cases it is, some cases it isn't. you know, the whole do you need to track veggies things. I mean, it's a whole debate, and I could make an argument for about, you know, 10 different scenarios, but the point is, I think it's just realistic or it's just consistent for people to just track everything, and no guesswork that way. So that's what I do. Next one, can you talk a little bit about the dangers of, oops, lost my screen. Dangers of insulin usage. What are the main ones to consider and watch out for, aside from taking too much and going hypo and accurately reading insulin measurements? Is there any harm taking it 5 to 10 units long term, a few days a week to bring lagging body parts up? Small doses a few times a week skew A1C levels. Okay, so one thing that doesn't get talked about a lot is hyperinsulinemia. So high insulin levels. People check their blood glucose. They don't really check their insulin levels very often. So people that are using a lot of insulin, or, you know, growth hormone and insulin together, when those doses get really high on the insulin, I do feel that it's important for them to check their fasting insulin levels and monitor insulin levels as well, because there is a pretty strong link between cardiovascular disease, and there's actually some other stuff I posted about just disease in general. I mean, disease in general, cancer was on there, you know, all major diseases. So linked to high insulin levels. So I would be cautious of that. Hardly anyone checks insulin levels, even though you should check it. They don't. So something to check in the lab work. Yeah, obviously going hypo, you know, but I mean, the fatal dose is massive compared to what most people think. Not going to throw numbers out there. Everyone's going to be different. Scenarios are going to be different. You have a lot of mechanisms that can kick in to counteract that if that does begin to happen. So, you know, that's not really what we're talking about. But in terms of like using it a few days a week for lagging body parts, sure, you could if you were increasing your intake on those days, or make the environment a little more, you know, quote unquote anabolic. Is it going to skew your A1C levels? Well, if anything, it would really depend on your blood sugar. If you're someone that's pushing carbohydrates, that's really testing your pancreas in terms of pushing it to its limits, pushing the beta cells to the limits of what they can produce endogenously, then if anything, it's probably going to help you long term. It's going to have a therapeutic effect, because it's going to rest those beta cells and not tax them as badly. It's not going to make them worse, certainly. It would probably be, like I said, if anything, it would probably make them better. I think that people have this idea that insulin use will automatically make you insulin resistant after a certain amount of time. You need to cycle on and off of it, which really isn't the case, because a lot of the time, like I said, it's in the right synergy with your blood glucose. Assuming you're monitoring all this, it's really going to have more of a therapeutic effect, because it's not healthy for you to walk around with hypoglycemia if you have an insulin, exogenous insulin in there to bring those levels down to normal range. You're going to be better off. And there's obviously other things to consider, like occasionally going out of a caloric surplus and bringing it down naturally without the use of exogenous insulin, things like that. But in general, no, that's not going to cause you to be insulin resistant or skew your A1Cs to a negative. If anything, it would probably be positive. But next one. Okay. Supplements you recommend for better digestion of bigger meals. Something like Now Super Enzyme's good to try. Main thing you would want to consider there is what is the macro composition of the meal. If it's a high-fat meal, then you're going to probably want something that's going to help with more liver bile, like D-limonene that I talk about sometimes, or ox bile. If it is, high-protein meal, then you're going to want some higher acidity, like betaine HCl intake, which I have a lot of people use. So, kind of, like I said, you figure out what the macro composition of the meal is going to be like. If it's just the fact that there's so much volume in the meal that it's bloating you and messing up your digestion, then cut the volume back. Use more calorically dense foods. That's going to move through you a little bit better and have less total bulk in your stomach that needs broken down. So it really depends on, is it a caloric thing, or is it just a volume, massive meal that's going to take a long time to digest because it's so big. So, kind of really depends on which you're talking about there. But again, there are things like the couple things that I mentioned that could help you with certain macronutrients, breaking down certain macronutrients. Going over to, I cut off the Facebook thread there, so we'll go over to Instagram. What are your thoughts on owning a certain body weight to getting to X weight during a gaining phase, holding it for a set period of time to allow your body to get accustomed to it before entering a cut or recomp phase? How do you approach this? Oh yeah, I've talked about this a lot. And last thing you want to do is go through your gaining phase and then right off the rip, just, I hit my new high weight. I'm 225 and got my goal, gonna go right into a cut. Well, you're probably gonna lose a lot of that weight. So yeah, you definitely want to hold that weight. How long? It's hard to say. I mean, if you were using supplementation things, you obviously want to let your hormones balance out and get all of those things even. I like people to be able to hold a weight without really having to change calories, honestly. So, holding a weight at baseline hormone levels, normal, feeling good, hold that for a few weeks or so, you're probably all right to go ahead and go into a deficit at that point. It's actually the same thing. I kind of look at it similar when in a surplus as well. So, for example, let's assume you're not super compensating. You're not just refilling glycogen and water where your weight's going up in like a linear fashion. This is later on in the growth phase when you are making, still making little small weight gains, not quite as big as at the beginning. I like to, if you stop gaining weight, it's okay to let it hold there for a little bit, to let those gains, solidify, or I say let the gains marinate, and before you push up again. You're really only going to gain tissue so fast. You don't have to have just constant weight gain. You can go up, flatten, and kind of go in that fashion. That's fine. You're probably going to have better progress long term and make more actual lean tissue gains at that point, at least from what I've seen anecdotally. So it kind of goes for the cutting and the growth phases. And coaching someone with limited resources to spend in the gym, what is your thought process? Here's some context. Okay, like context. Busy, moderately high perceived stress, going through some very big changes in life, career change, very limited income, moving, poor living situations, etc. All right, so this is a situation where you're really periodizing your training or looking at your recovery from the standpoint of stress. So this is somebody that is going to probably overtrain or be overtrained or feel like they're overtrained, or have poor CNS health, not necessarily directly from the gym, but because of their life stressors. So you're really going to want to take those things into consideration. They're probably only going to want to train 3 days a week or 4 days a week, and limit just basically minimum effective dose of volume and intensity to still progress but still recover. There's not any way I can say, yeah, you need X number of sets for whatever body part and this much frequency, but you can. That's the way that I'm looking at it. You're not going to be able to have maximum recoverability because all of those other stressors are cutting into your recovery ability, especially from nervous system standpoint. So yeah, it's a good observation. I mean, it's good that you're looking at these things. It's definitely something to consider. I would probably kind of undershoot a little bit and maybe work them up. And the reason undershooting there is I can say I still have some room to progress them, because I'm going to have a hard time progressing them volume-wise and intensity-wise and really pushing their phases, because they're going to have less room. I can't just say, starting 5 days a week, moderate volume, whatever, we're going to keep pushing it up until you overreach. Well, they're going to overreach quick because they got all these other things going on. So I might undercut them a little bit and have a little bit more room for them to progressively overload and add volume and all that stuff, and still have some room to take advantage of a good mesocycle. So that's how I would look at it. If their situation improves, obviously their recovery ability is going to go up just by default. Plus with limited, I'm assuming probably maybe even limited time to, busy. It says they're busy. So yeah, I mean, you can really help them. They're just stressing less because they know that it's a program that they can follow and not deviate from, and that it's going to fit in with their schedule. So yeah, definitely take that into consideration. And I would definitely be asking questions about stress and making sure that they're really relaying that information to you and how they feel. Not just like, oh yeah, my quads aren't sore, so I'm good. When really their CNS is just smashed to shit and they feel terrible. Their muscular skeletal system might not be beat up, but their nervous system is. So definitely need to take that into consideration. And let's see. Okay. Thoughts on programming mini cuts around 4 to 6 weeks. Long, start with small deficit, make small changes each week, or should we jump right into a large deficit, increase training cardio as needed? Touch on protocols for getting back into a surplus. Add calories slowly versus pushing calories high right away. So in a mini cut situation, if you're talking real short term, this is probably assuming the person doesn't need to lose a lot of body fat. I'm adding my own context here. I don't know the context they're talking about. I'm adding my own. If they're doing a short mini cut, chances are it's for a little bit of body fat loss, but it's also to resensitize insulin sensitivity, maybe nervous system, just get things feeling better, functioning better, partitioning better, drop a little fat, and so on and so forth, and then they're going to get back into their growing. If they need to lose a lot more, have a lot of health issues, or have other things going on that need more time to address, then this isn't even going to really be an option anyhow. So you wouldn't want to do that. So keep that in mind. Probably going to go right into it. When I've talked about this in the past, kind of the idea behind that is that it is a short amount of time. You shouldn't form a whole lot of negative metabolic adaptations if you just jump right in and get the deficit going hard and get in and get out, if you will. You'll form some, obviously, metabolism downregulates some. I mean, some of those things can happen pretty quickly, but it's not going to be terrible. It's not like going to be anything like a long contest prep, and you can get the job done. And what that also allows you to do is jump back up in calories relatively quickly, because you won't have that downregulation. You'll still have a relatively similar maintenance when you're done. Not everything's not like, dropped way down. So you'll be able to get right back into it. So to answer the second part of the question, yeah, I would probably go pretty close to back up to where they were. Or if you dropped 1,000 or something real big, like 1,500 calories or something, maybe at least do half of that or 3/4 of that to get back into it. And you find they're probably going to super compensate and probably going to be able to handle getting back up into that full capacity pretty quick, because those adaptations really aren't there. So, and how you create the deficit and stuff is totally up to you. You want to use cardio? Do you want to use calories? Do you want to use whatever? That's your call, depending on the person, their schedule, their recovery ability. So same with going back out of it. You're not going to slowly reverse, like I said. In that case, is kind of probably going to be pointless. You can pull the cardio, or put some calories back in, however you want to do that. But that's kind of my take on that. In most cases, that's how it would pan out. Last one, I believe. Okay. How did you taper your cardio from prep to where it is now at 10 times or 2 10-minute walks per day? Currently at 60 minutes a day into growth phase. And how would you cut back cardio? Thoughts on cardio on non-training days for general health benefits? Man, again, I've talked about this a bunch. It's really hard to answer because I don't know where you are calorically. If generally, rule of thumb is if calories are very, very low and cardio is moderate, add calories first. If cardio is very, very high and calories are moderate, then pull the cardio out first. Yeah, I think I'm saying that right. It's kind of a tongue twister. If everything's, calories are low and cardio is high, then you can just go half and half. Or also look into how the person's recovering. Are their legs destroyed? Are they just struggling to get through it? Is their CNS burnout? Well, if that's the case, I'm gonna take out activity. I'm gonna take out stuff that's taxing on the body. Adding more calories isn't going to be the quickest way to heal that. Doing less is probably going to be the quickest way to heal that. So see how beat up you are. See which variable in the caloric equation, whether it's calories or cardio, is highest, and push and pull that way. That's probably going to be your best bet. And that's how I look at it. I mean, all my stuff was high, or my calories were low and my cardio was high. So I put out the most taxing cardio and the HIIT cardio and stuff first because my nervous system. And I slowly chipped away at the steady state and pretty much added calories in pretty even fashion back and forth, honestly. So you can do it that way, but again, see what's high, what's low, and push and pull because of that. General health, I mean, yeah. Some people say no, some people say yes. One thing that I do like to keep in mind, though, is I don't like people's cardio to get so bad that they can't perform sets properly, like they're getting out of breath in the gym and just can't even get through a moderate to high rep set because their cardiovascular endurance is so shitty that they're just out of breath. That's not good, obviously, so you probably want to address that with some cardio and actually getting your heart rate up so you get used to it. So that's something that I would do with some people, not all people, because they just don't have to because they are fine without it. But I'm doing a couple 10-minute sessions. It's not because really factored in. It's obviously part of my caloric equation too, but I have like no NEAT levels because I sit and work on a computer. Yeah, I work a lot, but it's not, I'm not moving hardly. So it's just more NEAT levels, getting my blood flowing a little bit. And, do it after meals or something is like a help with digestion as well. So that's kind of where I'm at with that. I could not do any and just adjust my calories, surely, but that's, like I said, that's kind of how I push and pull on it. You'd have to look at your equation and see which is high, which is low, and decide that way. And that is it, guys. I will get this edited up or post it up. Don't do much editing. I'll talk to you guys next week.